I guess, are you... Would you be okay to translate a poem? Give commentary?
Is it Baba Taher?
Mm-hmm.
Which one is it?
I think I had sent it to you.
Just give me the first word.
It's Maronasa.
Oh, good. مرا نه سر نه سامون آفریدند، پریشونم پریشون آفریدند. پریشون خاطران رفتند در خاک، مرا از خاک ایشان آفریدند. Yes. You know, Schopenhauer has this beautiful sentence or paragraph. It's his kind of objection to Immanuel Kant, who had argued that human beings are noble and they're great and God lives inside them and all of that. Schopenhauer didn't believe any of that. You know, he believed that human life is a mistake. You know, everything from their physical body to their flimsy emotions to their even more flimsy intellect. It just makes a huge mess of life. Human beings are just miserable animals and they remain miserable. مرا نه سر نه سامون آفریدند. آفریدند means to be created. Saman means a resting place. Saru Saman. There is a passage in the Quran that human beings are born in struggle, in pain. That from the beginning of life, you know, to the last breath, you're just fighting against forces you don't see, you don't understand. You want to be alive. You have all sorts of tubes hooked onto you, but, you know, you don't know why you want to be alive, you just don't want to die. You know, if you take the story of Adam and Eve, literally, that there was in fact this man and this woman in the Garden of Eden. And as the Greeks would say, it was the golden race. You know, they had never experienced pain, they had never experienced work, they had never experienced any negative emotions. Everything about them was pleasant. They had no worries, you know, no struggle, no strife of any kind. Then all of a sudden a desire came about. And the problem with desire is the moment you have a desire, you have a lack, or at least you feel like you have a lack, that there is something that you don't have. And for them it was what, you know, they saw. In Islamic tradition, it's wheat. In the Jewish tradition, it's the apple. And so, they go near this tree, they take a bite off of this apple, and God sees them. They're ashamed. And God says, you guys are no longer worthy of being in paradise. I'm going to cast you out. And, they're thrown down here. And it says that, ink on paper. You will have to survive with your own blood and your own sweat. Your life is going to be filled with struggle. See, in the Old Testament, as well as the Quran. For all these thousands of years, we've been trying to find not so much physical rest, but emotional, intellectual, spiritual rest, where you can kind of just sit and say, there is no place I want to go. There is nothing I want to do. I am at peace. I'm not talking about these moments that all of us have, whether you go to a yoga shop or you listen to someone giving a lecture or a movie. He's basically saying that I was born in the cradle of struggle. I was born homeless, and that's what Saman is. Maran Nasar Nasaman Afaridan. I was basically born homeless. Parishunam Parishun Afaridan. Parishun means despair. The not enoughness. The not finding where happiness is, how happiness can be reached, how it can be possessed, how it can be obtained, how it can be protected, how it can be nourished. When you don't have a home, what you have is despair. And that's what he says. First line. I was born homeless. Second line. Parishunam parishun afaridan. It's kind of like Kierkegaard, who said that he was just born an old man. That when he was like 6 months old, you could see wrinkles on him, as if he had lived like 90 years. He had forgotten how to smile. The next line is Parishun khataran raftan dar khak. That those who lived in the cradle of despair, they eventually died. And out of their ash, out of their soil, they created me. Cassie, you're a mother. And I guess I have a couple of kids of my own. Shahriyar is a Persian poet. He has this beautiful poem. زندگانیم و زمین زندان ماست زندگانی درد بی درمان ماست زندگانیم و زمین زندان ماست. We are living beings in the prison of the world. زندگانی درد بی درمان ماست. That life that our life is a pain that has no remedy, that life itself, is a disease that has no remedy. Now, let's just say I really believe that. I believe the first line, that it doesn't matter what I do, it doesn't matter where I go, it doesn't matter how many degrees I have, whether I'm a part-time or a full-time. All the magnificent temples I built for myself, physically, emotionally, intellectually, there are going to be these moments where I'm going to feel absolutely homeless. If I was to be fully aware of my condition, why the hell would I want to have kids? To put them in this situation, to make them as homeless as I am. At least when I was homeless, Cassie, I had parents around me, I had family members, I had friends. پریشونم پریشون آفریدند. Despair is to some extent a child of hopelessness. And that's what parishun is. Just lose hope. You try to find a psychological, emotional home for yourself. You just can't. You go home, it doesn't feel like home. You go on vacation, it doesn't feel like vacation. Going back to what Allison said about if you don't express that which is inside you, it will suffocate you. I don't know what lives inside me. I don't know why it is that regardless of how much effort I put into things, how much I struggle to make things meaningful, eventually everything just falls apart and becomes meaningless. And if you've done this enough of times, you just become hopeless. How many times more do I need to walk in the classroom? Until I realize that there are no one who's going to listen and really, really understand. پریشون خاطران رفتند در خاک. You're born homeless. Your homelessness will eventually give birth to hopelessness and despair. And eventually you will die being homeless and being hopeless. مرا از خاک ایشان آفریدند. Those who died homeless and hopeless, they gave birth to me. I am made in their image. Sometimes Sarah and I talk about the kids. In this day and age, they go to a great school. But if they have my temperament, and if they like these poems, and if they have an experience in life that's going to devastate them, there's a good chance that none of their accomplishments will ever mean anything really. In some ways you could say that everyone, before they die, have a chance of reviewing their life. And there's going to be a great amount of regret, time wasted, energy wasted, ridiculous and childish fantasies and desires and pursuits. these are the parents that we have. They love us, but it's not enough. There is another poem that he has. ز دست دیده و دل هر دو فریاد، هر آنچه دیده بیند دل کند یاد. بسازم خنجری نیشش ز فولاد، زنم بر دیده تا دل گردد آزاد. That I see something, or I hear something, or I smell something, or I touch something, or taste something, and they are so beautiful. These are the five senses. They're beautiful. And they're very pleasant, and they're very positive. I enjoy them. I'm excited, inspired by them. And then I take them inside and put them in my heart. I store them there. And then I realize these things that have given me so much pleasure, as they have become really the cause of my hopelessness and despair and unhappiness. He says, I just want to grab a dagger or a knife and remove my eyes so that I don't see anything. And if I don't see, I don't desire. There was this, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this Christian woman, her name was Lucy. And it seems that as she was very attractive. As she was walking, this guy kept looking at her over and over and over again, and then followed her to her house, even though she was a nun. And he knocked on the gate. She opens the door, and he says to her, there is something about your eyes that have captivated me. I can't forget you. I love your eyes. And so, I don't know if the story is true or not, but she goes to the kitchen, grabs a knife, and removes her eyes from the socket, puts them on a plate, and takes it to the guy and says, here are my eyes. You can have my eyes so that you will never miss me. I think what all these poems and the story, have in common is that life is really, really problematic. We are given birth. We are basically the product of some stupid sexual desire of parents. They're not reflective. They're not aware. A woman at a certain point in her life says, I want to have children. That's her condemnation. It continues the human race. It's something that Schopenhauer argued, that the only reason why a woman would want to be with a man is to have children. In some ways he kind of like, Enkidu on his deathbed cursed the woman because the woman became the cause of, his fall from grace. So you look at our parents. Well, they don't really have that much intelligence. They're nice people. They love us. But they're not really the best guides. they can't guide us the right way. They have been contaminated by society. They know how cruel society can be if you have no money, if you have no education, if you have no car, if you have no schooling, no education. You know, you'll become homeless. You'll be invisible. You'll eventually get sick and die in the middle of the street without anyone caring for you. um, in some ways, you could say that if someone asks you, you know, who your parents are, you say, homelessness and hopelessness. You know, these are my parents. Um, you know, my parents, like all of us here, they're very, very lucky in the sense that, you know, they're still alive and they can actually sit back and enjoy their children, you know. Allison is now a professor, you're a professor, Stacy is a professor, you know, and all of us began with having nothing, you know. And now that you're a parent yourself, to some extent you can now have a glimpse of what you put your parents through, you know. I don't have the luxury of seeing those things in my kids. I won't live long enough to have my son or my daughter come to me one time and say, Dad, I'm really sorry for being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way to 25. Sorry for being so immature for all these years and putting you through hell. You know, and I say this because I think when he was writing this poem, it seems to me that he was feeling extremely and intensely homeless, abandoned. You know, he felt disconnected. He was in a state of contraction. You know, this is surely not a sort of positive thinking that Westerners enjoy, you know, about life. This is not about Tony Robbins or Eckhart Tolle. Any of those people will talk about. But again, you know, if you take this poem to Adam and Eve and how they were pushed out and they lived in exile, that's your story and my story. You know, no one has been able to go back to paradise and then live out their lives. All of us have been in exile and are in exile and will continue to be in exile. And in some ways you could say we'll never go home. The promised land will never ever be reached by any of us. You know, and so hopelessness and homelessness, they're going to be your companion as long as you live. There's an episode in Boston Legal. I think it's the last season where Alan Shore is before the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, because Danny Crane, who is his boss and his best friend, has Alzheimer's, and there is a medicine that's in the trial stage, and he wants Denny to have it, to take it, because some studies showed that it made some improvements. And in his speech he says, if I had the power to go inside Denny, my best friend, and find this disease and yank it out of him, I would, but I can't. If, for example, you send me an email, I'm just in a bad place right now. And given that I too have been in bad places for, many, 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 many years, and have seen them come and go, maybe deep down what I would say to myself, not so much to you, is that if I could just put my hand where you think there is pain and just yank it out of you, I would, but I can't. It's something that you just have to go through yourself. That whatever comfort you find in anyone is temporary, There is another tragedy about this poem, is that, if you want to live, if you want to kind of be aware of these 4 lines, what happens to laughter? What happens to friendship? What happens to religion, to God, to faith, to having a wife or a husband or children or parents? They would all disappear, One of the nice things about the past 2 years is that everybody has come to realize that, they can live without others. They can live in isolation. So the definition of friendship, of having parents, siblings, being in the classroom physically, everything is changing. And then it's going to be very difficult for you to kind of go out there and make friends with people. And restlessness will be your companion. And then you want to go out there and make some friends, but you can't. And hopelessness becomes your companion. And then nothing survives in your hands. You just turn everything into ice. We had a vice president a few hundred years ago. His name was Amir Kabir. He raised this kid who later on became the king, Nader. And Amir Kabir really loved Iran, and he really loved the people. Um, but Nader had this mother who was she was a snake. And she really liked the West, America, you know, United Kingdom, and she believed that the West has found salvation to life. And she kept whispering into Nader's ears that Amir is bad, Amir is this, Amir is that. But Nader saw Amir as his father. One day, Amir went home for lunch, and his wife, and they'd been married for a while, and she asked, "How are you doing today?" And he just broke down. And then he excused himself from the table and he went outside. And the wife later on said, "I've been married to this man for like 25 years. Never once have I seen him, you know, kind of break down. And this is the first time." That there came a point where he found that he is just unable to make any changes in the way the king was seeing things, any changes to the country. And then later on, he came to realize that the king, Nader, who was raised by him, had ordered his execution. So in the public bathhouse, so he goes there as he's cleaning up, you know, being washed and massaged. He looks at the masseuse and says, kind of like Jesus, you know, saying to Judas, "Whatever you want to do it now." He looks at this man and says, "I am ready." And he gets the razor and kind of just, you know, slits his wrist or throat and he dies. You know, when you realize that nothing can give you rest, whatever value things used to have, they no longer contain those values. You know, and if long time ago you believe that getting married will be a hopeful event, a happy event, getting a job is a hopeful, happy event, having money, all of a sudden you realize that's not the case. You just don't care for them anymore. You know, I have to say there is something about Persian poets that's really disturbing. For me, it's a good thing. I like it. I mean, Khayyam says the same thing. You know that گردون کمری ز عمر فرسوده ماست. دریا اثری ز اشک آلوده ماست. If you want to know how the oceans are created, it's our tears. Humanity has wept ever since they've been created, ever since they found themselves on this planet, because they looked for a home but they couldn't find one. They looked for hope, but eventually everything turned into ash, and they wept and wept and wept. You know. Or there is this poem by Hafiz, سینه مالا مال درد است ای دریغا مرهمی دل ز تنهایی به جان آمد خدا را همدمی. That human beings have been given a heart and it's just designed to be broken. And beautiful stuff, you know.